sometimes I sort of say that I'm very.
Now.
Sorry?
We're live now.
We're live. I'll finish that.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here in our office for the SynapseCarers information session this evening. We're really excited to be here and to be seeing some new and familiar faces in the room here in Parramatta, and we hope that if you are watching us live from home that you can hear and see us nice and clearly. It's really exciting to have this session this evening. This session is based around feedback that we got from our carers and from our clients that there wasn't enough information out there about prepare for the future. So we have ageing parents caring for children. We have children caring for their adult parents. But many people were saying there wasn't enough information around about how to make those preparations, how to think about the future, in the knowledge that there was going to be a point in the future that you were no longer going to continue in the role of providing the support that you are. Questions around guardianship and financial management. Housing is something that comes up a lot as well. And how to put things in place to make sure that when you're no longer able to provide the level of support you are now, that the person you're caring for is well supported. So what we did in preparing for these information sessions was actually reach out to our carers and to our networks and said, what is it that you'd like to learn about and who is it that you'd like to hear from? And one of the resounding responses was that carers most wanted to hear from carers as the subject matter expert. And so what we did was we put the word out there, and we found people who lived and breathed these experiences and had that wisdom based on their own personal experience of these issues. So I was very lucky to reach out to someone who I'd worked with a couple of times over the years, and asked him to come along this evening to share his wisdom and life experience. So thank you very much, Max, for joining us today. Max is, along with his wife Sue, a carer for their son Rowan. And Max is going to talk quite a bit about, I guess, the preparations that as a family they've made for the future of their son when they are no longer able to provide the level of support that they do now. And I'm very grateful for Michael Hampton, who's sitting here, who's going to be providing our interviewing for the evening. Michael has 10 years of experience working with people with brain injury and has worked with Synapse for 7 years as an advocate. So thank you both of you, and I'll leave you to it.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Laura.
So I came into Max's life probably 3 years ago now, thereabouts,
yes.
and as often with advocacy, it's when some hurdles are hit on the road along. So I think, Max, if we can sort of start with how your journey to becoming a carer commenced, and I think you'll tell us that, like many journeys for people with a brain injury and acquired injury, it commenced pretty quickly.
Exactly. Michael, thanks very much, and thanks for the opportunity to offer our experiences and hope that helps others on the way. As you say, things can happen very quickly. I guess our circumstance was as dramatic as my wife and I had a week in the Cook Islands. We were on our way home. The night before we left, our son sent us an email, text. He'd actually been to a course at Ballarat University. Very happy, very successful week that he completed the course and so on. And off we all went. We arrived in Sydney Airport at about 8:30 on Saturday night, turned on the phone, and it lit up. And what we found was that Rowan had been admitted to Royal Melbourne Hospital with brain injury, and by next morning we were in Melbourne. The ironic thing was, in his text, he said, "I'll speak to you Sunday." Well, it was Sunday morning, but he was speaking to us at the time. He was in pretty dire straits in Melbourne at this stage in ICU, and was not aware. And by the end of the first week, we were advised that we should get ready for considering turning off machinery, etc., etc. So we have gone from that stage, from a stage of happy normality, to a sudden burst of this in front of us. But I guess from there, we very quickly had to take our new life and address it step by step by step. A lot of times without experience, without advice. You really had to search. I guess we, as an example of all that, one of the few of the people that you run across as you go through, Associate Professor David Russell in Royal Melbourne was in charge of the ICU, and he worked with us. And as he said, his words were, brain injury is something that we know very little about. He said, I'm head of that department, but we know very little. He said, if you come in here with a broken arm or a broken leg or an injured heart or whatever, we can fix it. We'll pretty well do the best we can. Brain, he said, in 10 years, 20 years, somewhere along the line, we'll be told we were rather behind the eight ball. We didn't know. We didn't know how to handle brain injury. And his words were, just keep trying. Try what you can try and move on. We found that to get him back from Melbourne to Sydney, and a bed for an acute care person, it was absolutely difficult. We, in fact, contacted the Minister for Health before we had any action. But then Associate Prof at Concord, Alistair Corbett, put his hand up and said, I'm prepared to give it a go. And we've progressed with that attitude all the way through. You have to push, you have to push, you have to push every minute of every day to get the support you need. And I guess it doesn't help when a registrar says, look, I think you should immediately apply to the nearest nursing home. That's the best we can do. When you get that sort of comment, and it's a battle to work through that. That battle we did, and with the allied health people within Concord, they set up an incredible program of working with Rowan, and in the first meeting we had, basically one of saying, look, you're our team, and we have to rely on you. We don't know you, but you're our team. We need your help. We need that all the way through. As I say, the registrar was rather negative. The rest of the allied health support team really stepped up and assisted us to get Ro to his next stage. We tried at that time, this was still pre-NDIS days, so we tried at that stage of brain injury units. Will they help? They can't. They couldn't at the time, and there was just no chance of getting Ro in. So that left us, because we had no insurance cover, was basically their comment that they couldn't do it, and we had wasn't a traumatic brain injury, therefore you're on your own. So we then, our next step was to Westmead private rehab at our funding, no funding from anywhere else, our personal funding. We went and worked with that group of people for a period of time. Now the guy that was in charge of that rehab facility was an associate prof from the brain injury unit in Westmead. He was not able to get Rowan access to the brain injury unit. So yeah, there were these blocking steps time and time again. Again, what do? We keep going on. We keep trying, we keep pushing to do something different. We then, you talk about planning, we said, well, okay, no one seems to want to or can help in that regard. We will plan to take Rowan home to our place. We were living in a 3-bedroom apartment, ground floor. It was, you know, for us, a very comfortable, nice place, but we would have had to make modifications in Strata arrangements. That was, you know, not impossible, but it was a tremendous battle to do that. So we said, okay, next step, sell that off and buy a single level home to move from there. So that then gave us the accommodation to bring Rowan home. But again, in that case, we needed to modify. We did all this modification and so on. Now, how do you keep going under these circumstances?
At that stage, Max, you were starting to sort of make some decisions in relation to Rowan and
Yes.
where he'd live and things like that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the process behind that?
The process, I guess, Michael, was probably one of, how can I say, just bloody stubbornness. We heard the negative stories I mentioned. Find a nursing home for him, that's the best we can do. And with that, we were pretty determined that that wasn't going to happen. And what drove us to say, well, we can't find any other way. There was nothing else available. But we made the decision and said, we will do the job.
And from the point of view, but of actually discharging Rowan from hospital and bringing him home, did you need to get any orders in place or any guardianship provisions or anything like that?
Yes, all this happened as we progressed. We put our hand up and asked for, because a lot of the times when you, in this case, when you want to make a decision on behalf of Rowan, well, have you got his power of attorney? Have you got his authority? Have you got this? Have you? And of course, no, none of that's in place. So we then applied for a guardianship and financial management order to be done, and fortunately, that was awarded.
Yeah, and you were appointed.
We were appointed, and Sue and I were jointly appointed as guardians and financial managers for Rowan.
I think just we won't linger on that bit for too long, but the guardianship order, as with guardianship orders now, they're not a lifetime order. So the order for Rowan specifically was to make some decisions in relation to where he's going to live and some medical issues and things like that. But that order was reviewed shortly, probably a year later.
It was 2 years later.
2 years later.
2 years later, yes. It was the review came to the conclusion that we really didn't need guardianship any longer.
Yeah.
And then they pointed out that we held the position of a person responsible. And I guess you think, why a person responsible, not a responsible person? It's obviously a legal term. I don't know whether, Michael, you want to explain a little bit about.
So under the Guardianship Act, as it currently is, that there's a hierarchy of persons responsible for making decisions in relation to people, and that often sits with spouses initially, and then to parents if there's no spouse, and to brothers and sisters, and so on and so forth. And even with that provision in place, but it's often a difficulty that carers face when they come up against various government departments or larger institutions, particularly financial institutions and things like that, that in itself is not sufficient and requires people to go to the guardianship tribunal to seek specific orders in relation to it. But as I said, the guardianship orders will always be reviewed, and if there's actually no decisions to be made, then there's no need for a guardian to be in place at that particular time. And I think that if I'd be correct in saying that Bowen has continued to improve at great lengths.
Yes.
And you and Sue have almost a supported decision-making role now.
That's right.
That's right. That's right. If we could just talk about what that looks like.
Yes, and to get this position though, it's not something that comes suddenly to the top of your head and you know it all. There is a need to reach out and get the support. You know, Michael and his team, our support coordinator, worked well together and have supported us in pulling together the various bits and pieces that we'd asked for. How do we do this? Why do we do? Why? Who can we talk to about that? And it was by reaching out to principally these guys to help us to get to that point. It then makes it possible to make a decision as you roll along. And I think as a good example, you talk about Rose improvement. At a recent meeting we had with an OT, we were talking about something we'll come to later, SDA, which is specialist disability accommodation. We were talking to her about this, and her explanation was that, you know, you have all these various factors that are still not clear, but you need to get them on the table. You need to understand what the options you have, etc., etc. She was talking this through, and then she said, you'll finally distill this all down and you'll probably be able to make a decision. And with that, Rowan chirps up and said, it'll be bleedingly obvious. And from someone who had, you know, as I said earlier, that's, I guess, a measure or a level that we feel he has achieved in this time. He's really done well, and as far as we're concerned, oftentimes we wake up each morning and say, well, what's Ro going to do today? What's happening? And it's that positivity all around him that helps. And reach out in the carers, people who are able to help you make these decisions. They're not out on the streets selling their wares. You really have to dig to find them. And as I say, we're still searching.
And just sort of looking at when Ray went home to your place, what was involved at that stage in relation to preparation for him coming home and the discharge and things like that?
Yeah, look, preparation again was, I used suck it and see. It was the only way, because we talked to the people at the rehabilitation hospital and they gave us a couple of brochures, but they were basically ACAT applications. And we said, well, no, that's not where we want to go. And that's where we kept coming back to Synapse and the support coordinator to keep digging. But with that in place, we were quite determined to make sure that the house was modified to accept and make it possible to look after Ro. That was all done. We applied to NDIS the day that it was available. And took over 12 months to get a realistic plan. We had a part plan partway through, but there were quite a few struggles in that case to get there. But finally, with the support again, we got across the line, and we've just finished the last review. And but the end of year review. But we are ready to review that decision as well. So it's a battle, And the question that I often ask is, if we don't have these resources and we don't have the I guess the strength, the fortitude to keep fighting for this, I feel sorry for the people who just can't do that, because I'm just concerned that they just do not get what they're entitled to. But you know, as I keep saying, we keep battling, we keep fighting.
And you do that very, very well. And certainly at this last review meeting that we had, you know, there was actually discussions with the NDO planner at that stage as to long-term goals and to looking at housing options into the future, starting to establish for the next 3 to 5 years what housing and accommodation options might look like.
That's right.
In relation to that. And I know, as meticulous as you always are, you've looked into many options in relation to them. I'm sure that everybody listening would like to have a little bit of an insight into what you've done and where you're looking and the different options that you're coming up with, and certainly with the view at the moment that nothing's locked in place and it's all
no. Look, it's one of those parts of this whole process that is, you know, you can't leave a stone unturned. You know, from the registrar saying you've got to find an aged care home, and you think, well, if that's the only option, maybe we've got to have a look. So we went and investigated and asked and quizzed, and no one was terribly keen. ACAT didn't really want to recommend that a 36, 38-year-old, 40-year-old man be put into that circumstance. So cross that one off. That's gone. We looked at group homes. Group homes is another option. Again, we'd go down the path. We actually went to 1 or 2 group homes to see how they work. How would this fit? Would this work for Rowan? If, you know, and of course, the whole time we're saying we're looking after him until we can't. And that I think is it puts us in our minds a very strong position that we don't have to accept second best. And we saw group homes as very much second best. It was nowhere near. And even for short respite, we quickly went through the sums and found that short respite, he was better off at home with personal care coming in, looking after him, whilst we went and did what we wanted to do or had to do.
With carers that he knew.
Yes, carers that he knew, people that he knew around him, and he feels comfortable with that. And as it turns out, the actual cost would have been cheaper than it would be in a group home in a short stuff for the same period. So that was off the agenda as well. But it all takes time. This is hard work. You're out there grinding away. You know, I often say to my wife, I ran this little consulting business in the latter years while I was working, and kept busy. You were always chasing something. You were always doing something, but it didn't draw on the resources that you need to draw on for a job like this, and the job is never ending at this stage. So we passed down that path with very much still this view, which gives us, where do we go next? What's next? There was an announcement. SDA, young people out of nursing homes. There's a federal government position of trying to get away from that and find out options. But it's early, very early. And we asked the question, of course, almost the day it was announced, saying, well, where do we go now? And I can remember saying to Michael, can you tell me who I've got to talk to? And I think the response was something along the lines, well, once we all know, we'll have a chance.
And it's one of the things with the NDIS and looking at various options going forward. You know, that it still is a very early stage scheme in relation to it, and all of these options are things that you're looking at a time when you're not in a position to have the involvement that you have now. So if we look at SDA, and SDA is Specialist Disability Accommodation, and it refers specifically to the bricks and mortar involved in relation to it, specifically when there's the person with the disability has needs around mobility and needs around the design of the house being specifically tailored to what they need to have their activities of daily living looked after on a constant basis. And that may well involve, if that person was in a wheelchair or powered wheelchair, wider hallways and wider doorways, and if they needed assistance to be transferred and things like that, the need for hoists to be inbuilt into houses and things like that. And also then in other aspects, if there wasn't mobility issues, but there's, and particularly relevant to people with brain injury, unfortunately at times, there may be some issues around behaviour and things like that that require what's known as a more robust build for the house and things like that. So there's various areas and various qualifications and various levels of specialist disability accommodation that are envisaged as becoming available into the future, and various things that I know that you've looked at, Max, in relation to setting things up for Rowan into the future and how to design a property that possibly he can live in the future, and also get some income from in the future as well. And things like that. You know?
Yes. Look, I think as SDA, and as we say, it's not even 12 months old, the announcement. But there are interesting developments coming along. And there's a company already registered. The company calls itself SDA Builders and Constructors. So they've obviously, we haven't been able to talk to them as yet, but they claim that they are able to build to the specifications that will be required by NDIS. They will, in fact, buy a block of land to build a house or build facilities to accommodate people with disabilities. And so this goes on. And so just that's on one side of the fence. On the other side of the fence, I know from personal discussion only in the last days that there was a developer who had put before Gosford Council a block of land. He bought 3 single-level accessible homes on each 3-bedroom, you know, nice finish, all that sort. And he went to council and they said, look, no, we're not interested. This doesn't comply with our current standards. You're 900 millimetres from the back fence. We want you to be 3 metres from the back fence. I'm sorry, you'll have to go away and redesign your development. And we'd recommend that you put, maybe you have one level home, in accessible home. And the others, they have to be 2-storey to fit on the block if you want them to the accommodation that you want. And the immediate conflict here is, here's someone who's ready and prepared to build, and yet the council hasn't really caught up with the requirements of this. This developer is saying, hey, there's a market here for people who require this sort of thing. And he has 1,200 metre doors, 1,100 metre passageways. There's a whole gamut of issues that would meet the requirements. Now, he probably still would have to get SDA approval if he were going to get some support in doing this. But at this point in time, there's still a lot of work from the top to the bottom to understand what this is all about. And, you know, we keep going. We've actually come to I guess it's almost short-term, not all that short-term, decision of saying, well, look, we think we'd be better off to buy have a home, which is basically what we've got here, but there's a drive for the longer term again for Rowan. His sister lives on the Central Coast. She has a little Down syndrome guy, so she's got a busy time. She's not going to be able to look after Row as well. So we're saying, but she would like to be, of course, closer to him, particularly when we're not in a position to take care of him. So there's a move for us to try and establish ourselves in the area a little closer to Rowan's sister. But our current thinking is, look, we're better off to buy a home, modify it to the standards that we need, or build it to the standards that we need, and then with the long term, Row can be there, a carer can be there. If we need a carer and put all that together, we've then still do it in one place. Yeah. So that's, but you've got to do that. And to do that, it requires some funding and all these sort of things. So you're turning this over and over and over again. And it's a battle.
Yeah. And I think just to clarify for people who are listening as well, you know, it's not necessary to go out and actually find your own block of land, find your own accommodation and build that in relation to that. The SDA payments attached to the participant and can then be used to pay to any provider or developer who may be offering accommodation into the future in relation to that. So, and while you touched on sort of your daughter and moving up to the Central Coast and things like that, I know that there's thought processes there about future decisions that might need to be made for Rowan. Yes. and things like that, and his ongoing finances and things like that. And sort of, you're certainly having talks with your daughter to start with, because that's what it starts.
Yeah, exactly.
As to whether or not she's feels comfortable and will be in a position to assist Rowan in the future. So maybe I think that's an area that people want to hear about as to how those conversations happen and the thought process behind sort of having decisions.
But there's again all these options. The options include things like, well, when do we set up, if we do, a trust, a disability trust for Rowan? And if we do set it up, how do we set it up based on what our daughter's abilities and time can give us?
So talk about a disability trust. Rowan has had a little bit of money invested in superannuation from his working life prior to that. He's likely to, in his case, inherit a little bit of money. And whatever else. And there are provisions that can be put in place called a specialist disability trust that allow funds to be put aside for a person's future needs that don't impact on their ability to draw a pension or to draw a disability pension or an age pension into the future and don't affect their income. That's where a specialist disability trust sits, and that's something that people should get advice about from you know, if that's something that is within the scope of each of the families, then get some advice in relation to the financial planning and things like that. But more specifically, you looking at, even if that was in place,
Yes.
someone's got to be controlling that and making
That's
decisions
right.
in relation to that.
And again, the options pop up. It can be done by the public trustee. Can you appoint a trustee? And there are various options within there. And with the setup, how can we have it set on the assumption that Marnie is prepared to take the role of managing the financial matters, that she's still able to keep a finger on the pulse, but doesn't have to do the work that is involved with getting all this together. So there are so many options, and everyone's going to be individual. The advice, there are many areas of advice. One area that we found pretty helpful was Centrelink. When you ask for a Centrelink financial advisor, they were very sound in their advice. And things like, look,
As surprising as that may sound.
Us had very little to do with Centrelink in our lives, and you hear all these terrible stories. But this case, the path that we've had through has been pretty good. And even at the stage of getting Roe to a point where he was applying for a disability pension, he didn't apply. I went and talked to the guy. We went through a whole process of getting all that done.
You're able to do that because you were his trustee.
That's right. And that was the other thing that allowed me to do it. And so there were several steps in that whole process. But again, all I can say is every little bit of advice you can get, you've just got to go after it and finally distill it. And as the OT that was talking to us and Rowan said, you've got to sift and sift and sift, and you throw a lot aside, and you'll finally get to a point where you can get things done.
And I'm hearing Max as well. While these are not easy discussions to have, but they need to be discussions that are had.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I couldn't say more about in the longer term of it, in the overall principles. Everyone's going to be different, but if you stick to a few simple principles on the way through here, and that is always, in my view, advocate for the person with the disability. They in their own right can't do it. They've got to have someone. So that someone, in our case, we put our hand up, but we reach out then. Then we reach out and say, now, Michael, can you help me? Lauren, can you help me? Someone else.
I'm just going to stop you there for a second, because I've watched you and Sue and Rowan together, and you sort of talk about Rowan can't do it for himself, but I know that you and Sue talk to Rowan about all these things.
Oh, exactly.
And you make sure that he, in Rowan's own way, contributes and
yes, and that's so important. It is so important, and as I see that as part of the advocacy role, because what are we advocating for if Rowan doesn't agree, or doesn't know, and doesn't, it's a difficult path to run, and that's where we spend a lot of time in doing exactly that.
And I know there's a couple of sort of difficult areas that people wanted to sort of, have a little bit of a think about and a talk about, and that's sort of talking about care directives for the future and things like that, and how, if you've gone about having a chat about it, and if you have, how you have.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Sue and I had said, look, we've got to keep our wheels in shape, we've got to get enduring powers, we've got to have all the bits and pieces that everyone talks about today.
And just for that this is for the carers themselves, you know, to have their
Absolutely.
have their affairs in
Have
order.
their affairs in order, because without that, there's very little can be done. And of course, with someone like Ro with a brain injury, it's at this point not possible for him to have a will, because he's not in a position to make that decision. So we've got to work through those issues. We as far as his medical and dental and so on is concerned, that still comes back to what the Guardians told us about the person responsible. So we are.
And with that, but you talked to Rowan about that, and you sort of, you know, tell him what's going to happen, and
Yes.
and he's never said no, don't do that.
No.
In relation to
He did one
He did what?
occasion, but it was interesting. We were moving into this new house, and we showed him some photos of the new house, and there was at the front there was this rather big tree, and I said to him, Ro, I'm not sure whether we'll keep that tree because it's the roots of, etc. And his immediate response was, Dad, you'll keep that tree. And I thought, okay, Ro, the tree is still there. But, yeah, and there are times that, you know, he'll say his bit. And I guess one of the things is carers and the support around Rowan. There's not many people that he doesn't work with. He'll work with the bulk of them. Now, there was one particular carer who came and was a guy, I say an old guy, almost my age, but he was a rather lecturing sort of individual and personality, and he was telling Rowan at one stage, giving Rowan a lecture on what he thought he should do, he shouldn't do, and there's only one other, but on this occasion, Rowan said to him, and you can F off out of my home and get away. I don't want to see you again. Now, Rowan doesn't speak with a lot of his own, he doesn't initiate a lot of words. He'll answer questions very readily. And in fact, you know, things like the millionaire hot seat and so on, he can answer quite a lot of those questions. And that's, you know, always interested in that. But to initiate something is a real challenge for Ro at this stage. It's getting better, but that's one of his challenges. And it was just interesting that how strongly he felt about this person and said, no, I don't want to see him again, and so on. So there are a lot of times that he'll go through the whole process. So and he understands a lot more than he can communicate back to us.
And would I be wrong in sort of saying that helps you be confident in the things that you want to put in place into the future for him, because you understand his contribution to those things?
Absolutely. As you know, as I think we often say, we've got one full-time job. Ro happens to be our full-time job. We're happy to do it. We'd obviously, most of us would prefer that we don't have to do these things, but that's our job at the present time. And we look at him every day and ask that same question. You know, how are you going, Ro? What else can we do? How can we help you? And look, there are times we'll say, you know, I'm pissed off on this or on that, and the words will come out.
Yeah.
But it's a, I guess, as you say, a confidence that we've developed by being able to communicate with Ro in the way that he can communicate and get the message across. So it gives us that confidence. And as I say, we're more than happy to get out of bed each morning and say, what are we going to do better today?
I think just before we sort of throw things open for questions as well, you know, there was some, I think one of the things that came out of the survey and from the carers and things like that was, you know, Rowan's got this fantastic support team around him, you know.
Yep.
Obviously, you and Sue and the family are sensational, in my view, in relation to having seen it. And but you've got therapists and support workers around you.
Yes.
And you've gone through, no doubt, the ups and downs and travails as to how you've found people who work well with Rowan. And,
Yes.
And everybody's comfortable. Just want to expand on that a little bit in relation.
Yes, yes. Look, again, it's I spent a lifetime in management roles and selecting people to work with you within your team and all those sorts of things. And you think, oh yeah, well, I've come across a lot of this, but it only, I think, is just about prepared me for this particular role. But again, it comes back to some very simple things. You research before you make decisions. You look for other people's views and opinions. Who should you talk to? Where should you go? And again, we've had the support to point us in a general direction. Still, at the end of the day, you need to talk to the people, see how they react and work with Ro and how he reacts. And it's a long, slow process, but we find that the best way around it. The other thing is then performance management, and there is only one way in that. You tell the good news and you also tell the bad news. Very upfront and very straight. You know, there's no need for AVOs to be called because you're being nasty. It's just do it very, very, very personably, but very openly, and make sure that, and if people, of course, they get a couple of chances.
Yeah.
If they don't come up to the table, well, you've just got to say, well, I'm sorry. That's no longer suitable. We'll have to move on. We'll do something else. But you've always got to keep an ear, well, what's happening, who else is having a good experience, who else is not, how's this going, is this working well with you? In fact, some of the best feedback comes from the carers from within organisations. The carer will say, oh yeah, this organisation we work for, they don't do this or they do that or they do something else well or they do that. And oftentimes you can really find how that organisation is working and how its long-term support with you are. But again, you know, keep Ro as involved as anyone else. And, you know, I'll give another example of Ro's rather to the point. He's currently at an intensive physio group he goes 8-week blocks where he does a lot of repetitive hard work. But it's really working for him. And one of the physios that were there with him, somehow or another, his comment was he liked working with her. He liked this young lady. And I said, well, why do you like working with her and not probably someone else? He says, she doesn't treat me like a dickhead. As I say, it's rather, and then when we relayed this back to the young lady, she says, and that's because you're not, Rowan. So it was a good relationship. But you cling on to those things, and you really work with that, and that's probably the most important feedback that you can get.
It's one of the things that the NDIS is sort of, I think, allowed people to sort of do and whatever else. And for those who weren't here in pre-NDIS years, you know, you're sort of given a support team and given a provider, and that was it. Stuck with them. But now you can be fussy, and you should be fussy.
You've got to be fussy. You've got to be fussy. Yeah. No, and it happens day by day. There's a team of 2 people that come and look after Ro, and recently there was one little slip up they made, and I addressed both of them and said, look, this is a problem here. And of course, one said it, one said it. And I said, well, I don't hear any of that. What I want you to do is make sure it doesn't happen again. And it was simple as that. Just roll on, let's go. But it's just day to day. Oftentimes people say, oh, you should go away and you shouldn't be around. Let the carers do the caring, the support caring that needs to be done. You don't have to do their job as well as yours. But if you're not there and you're not in contact and listening and hearing what's going on, I'm afraid the standard slips. And it's a very natural human reaction. If you're not kept up to the mark, you'll slip away and do things not quite as thoroughly as otherwise. That's a general, very much a generalisation I'm putting there, but it's true.
Well, so since you've sort of come into the world of service providers, come into the world of paid carers and things like that, how have you gone about sort of changing between providers at
When
needed?
When you need to. Yeah, as I say, go back to my previous comment about honestly, upfront. And, you go through a process. I like to give everyone a chance. And if they can't correct it, well, then it's the time. And you've got every reason and justification for doing it. At that point, we very clearly no longer carry the discussion with the carer. We move back to the organisation and very clearly, openly, directly say, this is the reason I've come to this conclusion, and this is what we're doing, we're moving on, or we don't want that person here, or whatever we're doing. You've really got to clearly put it on the table, and I say, be open and honest, good news, bad news. At the same time, I think it's important to contact the organisation when there is some good news, someone that's performed well. You feed that back. As importantly as the day that you have to say, well, I'm sorry, guys, we're parting our ways. And it's always done, in my view, as professionally as you possibly can. There's no point in entering into some great debate. That's always easy for some people to break off and want to beat up the rest of the world, and you included. But there's no point in that.
No, and I think it's important for carers to know that they're the people with the control, and they're the people with the power.
Absolutely.
In this relationship.
And that's where I come back to the description of fussy. Be fussy. The best time to make decisions is before the event and not after. In other words, select the right people. Sure, that'll go wrong at some stage or other. But if you can make that decision before you take them on, the better off you are. The more experience, the more feedback you can get about that person, that organisation, whatever from outside, it saves a lot of heartache at the time of saying, well, I should have done something else back then. Do it up.
You might see if there's any questions from anybody in relation to it.
I might just, before we open the floor to questions, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things, if I can, Max. In terms of because we're just talking about carers, something that someone told me in one of my previous roles was that don't think about these carers as doing you a favour. That we need to change our attitude towards these paid carers I'm talking about, not
Yes,
informal
sure.
carers.
No.
That they're not coming in and helping Rowan or Sasha because it's a favour. It's a service that they're being paid for, and changing that attitude and changing the way of looking at it, the perspective, makes a real difference, I think, to encouraging the person with the brain injury or the person with the NDIS plan and their carers and their loved ones to stand up and say that service actually isn't good enough for these reasons, and going to management. I think that was a really good point, Max, rather than going to the carer themselves, going to their management and saying, this is what we've tried, this is what we've experienced, and this is our decision. Because it's a service that's provided.
Yes, I think some of the providers are very clear. When I say the providers, the management, the team of providers, particularly those who are very thorough in putting their stuff together, they will, give you what are your responsibilities, what are the paid carers' responsibilities, and there's some of them that very clearly say we are not looking for personal relationships to grow out of this. We're really looking this as a service to someone with a disability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, look, the world's the world, and there'll be relationships that'll build out of these things and so on. But the general principle is very much one of let's keep it on a professional basis.
Absolutely. It's a service that the person with disability is brokering, is that they're paying out of their NDIS plan. So it's certainly within your rights to get the service that you want. I also just wanted to clarify, I'm not sure, Michael or Max, whether you'd like to answer this, but you spoke about making sure that you had to get guardianship and financial management before you could make decisions with Rowan leaving the hospital. I guess I was just wondering if you can talk about that a little bit more, explain what that involved, how you had to go about doing that for some people who are perhaps thinking that might be needed in the future, or interested in that.
I guess our path through that was simply one of, we'd run into these roadblocks, some that we mentioned before. Another one was Rowan's credit card. I wanted to make sure that business was cut off. And they said, oh, no, you haven't got authority to do that. You can't do this, you can't do that. And so when we ran into these roadblocks, we said, well, we talked to the social worker at Concord, and she said, yeah, well, look, probably the best way around it is a guardianship order. Then she was willing enough to make contact, and then you have to go to submit. It's quite a lengthy submission on, and any other interested party you need to name and do all this whole process, and they have to go through a fact gathering around that. So they then organised it was a video conference where Ro was still in Concord. They were at their end at that time was in Balmain, and we had this discussion. At the end of it, we said yes, we grant that. Now there's a whole board that sits in that conference to make sure that happens, and that was where it went. And then from there on, the person that we reviewed with each year was, I'm not sure what the qualification was, but they're...
So the guardianship tribunal initially is made up of 3 members. So a senior member who's a legal member and is a solicitor. Then there's a professional member who has a medical background, more often than not is a doctor. Then there's a community member, and the community members can be, more often than not, have some sort of disability background and possibly from various sort of areas of disability or cultural background and things like that in relation to it. I suppose from a practical level, it's a formal written application to the New South Wales Consumer Administrative Tribunal, and a division within that tribunal, known as the Guardianship Division now, to seek orders in relation. And there's two separate orders. There's an order in relation to guardianship, which is about making decisions about people's lifestyle, so where they live, what medical treatment they get, what dental treatment they get, sometimes what services that they might have, and sometimes who actually sees them. There can be things called access orders as well in relation to them. And the tribunal gives various powers to the guardian in relation to that. Then there's a separate responsibility that looks at specifically the financial decision making into the future, and that financial management order either goes to a private trustee, who can be a range of people, more often than not a family member in relation to that, and that's certainly the preference of the tribunal and the preference of the Guardianship Act itself. But if that's not available, then there's a public trustee option as well, so the New South Wales trustee. And guardian, just to confuse the situation, they throw the name guardian in there as well, but they're not actually a guardian. The legal side of things in relation to it. And that's that. And if it is a private trustee, but that's actually also annually reviewed by the public trustee to just ensure that things are progressing in the right way. And just to sort of finish up, it's something that my role as an advocate and Synapse in their role will always assist in relation to helping people with the applications and gathering the evidence that's required into the future and things like that. And particularly when often there's that initial sort of assistance from the hospital social work department in relation to it, but talking about future planning and talking about what happens a long way down the track is then going back to the sort of supports that are around it to assist with those applications.
I think also, I know, Max, you've said that Rowan isn't in a position to now make a will or an advanced care directive or enduring power of attorney, but Michael, in your experience working with people with brain injury and their families around some of those areas, is that something that you recommend in some cases?
Certainly, capacity of someone, particularly with a brain injury, and notwithstanding often what the medical profession tells us is an evolving situation. People's neuroplasticity increases going forward, and their ability to make decisions and understand decisions they're making is an evolving situation. I would always sort of recommend to people that if someone wants to take control of their own decisions and to have their capacity looked at and to talk to their doctors and to talk to people around them as to whether or not they have, formed new pathways that allow those decisions and capacity to be made into the future. It's certainly not a situation that I've been told that I don't have capacity immediately after the brain injury. I don't have capacity now, but I don't always have capacity into the future. It's always something that can be reviewed, and there are different ways of reviewing it, and depending on what sort of decisions need to be made will depend on the different areas that need to be looked at in relation to it.
And I have one last clarification question before we open it up. If a person's gotten to the point of urgency or emergency, I guess that the carer is injured or unwell or taken to the hospital, has gone to the point where they can no longer continue providing that care. What's the first step, I guess, in that situation?
So the carer in that situation, can, and if it's actually to the point of extreme urgency, the guardianship tribunal has the ability to make decisions on a 24/7 basis in relation to various things. If the carer sort of can see a situation developing quite quickly, the carer themselves can make an application to the tribunal to bring the matter to the tribunal's attention. The tribunal then can have a look at other people who are available to be put into that decision-making position forward. But that can actually be done quite quickly if needed.
Laura, there's one other point on emergencies that I'd like to make, and I think with some of the documentation that you last left with me, and we discovered it beforehand, is the emergency, information document that needs to be prepared for that carer. Now, oftentimes, that can be left in a place. For example, if something goes wrong, and I know in our case, if Rose, not one of us is not in good shape, if someone can call an ambulance and you have this emergency data in front of you somewhere, close handy, on hand, it is absolutely important that that is prepared and you spend the time getting that together.
Absolutely.
Because that will save a lot of heartache somewhere down the track.
So what Max is referring to there is an emergency plan, an emergency care kit. The Australian government has prepared a number of different documents. I've got some printed versions here, and there's some great online documents.
Yes.
They recommend that you review them regularly, and they contain, or they recommend it contains information about that person's diet, their medication schedule, their history, medical history, so that in the case where you as a carer are no longer able to provide the support on an urgent basis, someone can come in and they have the basics. And it's the one that's available on the Carer Gateway, which I can direct you to. I've got lots of resources. It's a really good online tool that you can fill in and share electronically with GP or whomever needs to have access to that. But having a printed copy as well, on the fridge or wherever the other documents are, can be very useful too.
The one additional lesson out of that is often that we all should have stapled on the fridge or somewhere or other your medications and some of that emergency data.
For yourself as
For
well.
yourself as well. For everyone should basically have that. We had a case a while back, and Sue has a condition where every so often heart takes off and races around the world, and she runs a marathon in about 2 minutes. And it's important that we get care. Now, it was sheer luck that I was there. Rowan was actually away at one of his day care exercises, and we were able to pull it together. But had she been there on her own, or had she not, and was able to get at least the ambulance to come, at that stage, she's not in a state to be able to tell you, hey, look, this is my condition, or this is what's going on. So it is rather important that it's all put together.
So we'll open it up now if anyone has any questions for Michael or for Max.
We're talking about the guardianship. They're different for each state.
So the question,
With ACT.
So the question was just around guardianship. Is it different in each state and territory?
It is at present. So it's one of those areas that each state has their own act in relation to it. It's a state-based legislation. It's not a federal legislation at this point in time. There are, in saying that, there's certainly provision in each of the acts for orders to be transferred between jurisdictions, as they call it, so between states in relation to it, and certainly the New South Wales Act has that in it, but unfortunately they're not uniform now at this point in time.
Yes, I was curious to know, Max, when you went and visited the group housing facilities, what was it about that didn't quite excite you?
So the question was around Max talking about his visits to the group homes and what it was about it that helped Max make the decision
Not to go. Yeah, well, the decision is that, Rowan needs, we call it 24-hour care. Sure, he's not every minute do we attend to him, but its definition is 24-hour care. Now, both group homes we visited, there was one person there looking after a number of people, quite a few of them could help themselves, and the lady who was managing the facility, we said, well, there's one guy needs immediate attention, constant attention. You've only got one person here to do it. How does that really work? Oh, she said, look, if I need someone else, I'll call them. And then she went on to say that on this occasion, that weekend that just passed, oh, she said, here I have a camera shot or a whatever we call it these days, social media shot of 2 or 3 of the people who were in the group home having a barbecue. And I said, well, who else was supervising? Oh, no, they're okay. So she said, oh, well, if someone's here, we'll get them in. It just left us very empty. And that was the common theme in the 2 that we went to. And we said, well, okay, that's not for us. It doesn't suit. And, again, you've got to be fussy. You've got to make the decision. And another example, we were said, look, you should talk to a group in around Gosford who does a lot of community access work and that sort of thing. And you should go and see their organisation. They may be able to help Rose with his community access. And we went to their place. Now, the people that they were looking after had to be locked in the facility, and they were. It's a horrible circumstance, and I don't want to sound as though my boy is better than the rest, because that's not the case. But it just did not fit, and Rowan just could not fit into that environment.
Michael, you have a lot of experience of going into group homes, and did you want to talk about that a bit?
I've sort of got, I think my view is that the whole idea of the NDIS and the whole idea of disability going forward is to sort of make it as much mainstream as possible in relation to life. And having and if we look at everybody in life, people live in different areas in different ways, and each group home is not the same, and each individual going into them often has different needs and different things that they can take from that interaction. So, I think there are many options out there, and there are more and more options coming online each sort of monthly almost in relation to them, and for someone who I think from what I'm hearing from Max is that with someone like Rowan who needs other people to do almost everything for him. Group homes at times can be very isolating places, and people can be left in corners, for want of a better term, and forgotten. Whereas I think for other people who don't need those things done for them on a regular basis, but enjoy or need contact with other people constantly, then they can be beneficial in relation to it. There's no right or wrong at the end of the day.
And something that I've noticed as well is that for some people and in some circumstances, those group environments can actually build independence rather than reduce it.
Yep.
Because it is actually, well, it's one of the buzzwords of the NDIS, capacity building. But that environment for many people does actually increase their skills for independence as well.
It's very much that the person that you're looking after, is it best for them, and do they fit?
That's
Does it fit for them? It's almost as simple as that.
Okay.
I'm just talking, I'm interested in the guardianship versus nominee. I'm a nominee for my daughter through Centrelink, and I seem to be able to do everything that I need to do at the moment. But, when do you need?
So the question was around the difference between nominee and guardianship, and when does guardianship become necessary?
So your nominee essentially would be more of a trustee situation and a financial situation in relation to your interactions with Centrelink will be around those sorts of things. They won't be around where your daughter lives or what doctor she sees or things like that in relation to it. Centrelink often there's some difficulties in the transition from 17 years and 365 days to 17 years and 366 days to 18 at that point in time, whereby your role as a parent is seen to finish and cut off directly at that point in time, and then the requirement for the person to have a formal decision maker, not been that in the past, from a legal point of view, takes control. So there can be some times to negotiate at that stage in relation to it. It's each situation to itself as well. It depends on what's set up at the time as to whether or not you can negotiate through without getting financial guardianship or without being a guardian, quite frankly. If you can negotiate through the various areas that you need to do that, then there's no need to get it. And it's I find it sort of something that I think at times it's demeaning for the carer who's been there through the whole situation, and it's sort of doesn't value their contribution. And it's also then, it's that final little bit of control often the person has themselves as well that is formally relinquished in relation to it. You don't really want to try and get to. So, and I know that's not a great answer in relation to it, but it may well be that when you get to that stage, that nominee transfers over and allows you to flow through. And it's a different situation from being a nominee in the NDIS as well in relation to it, which has its own set of rules around it and doesn't transfer over. And it's a difficult situation because often the NDIS doesn't look at the guardian as having certainly a public guardian. Public guardian doesn't like making decisions in relation to NDIS things. In things like that. And just
So do you hold on to your nominee status for as long as possible?
that would be my view. Yeah, that's right.
To hold, your view would be to hold on to
Hold
the
on to
nominee
it. Oh, yeah,
status. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. And at that state, you know, at that point in time, you've got all the things around that. So you've got the ability to sort of have a MyGov account and log on to things over the internet and sort of, you know, we're in a very much a changing world where you can't just walk in and see someone and do things. Everything sort of tends to happen online with double authentication codes and this and that and whatever else, which actually is possibly beneficial to keeping a nominee position and not having to involve a formal order in that point of view. So yeah, I would be, look, as much as possible, if you can continue to be an informal decision maker and a nominee going forward, that is the, in my view, the best way to go forward.
Because it's really, it's like, what, is there going to be a day when someone will come and wave a stick and say, hey, you're not a guardian?
No, that won't happen in relation to it. You know, if decisions are being made and good decisions are being made and supported decisions are being made, generally speaking, there's no one going to turn up at your door and say, you need to have a guardian. You've turned 18. You need to have a guardian in relation to that. In saying that, there will possibly be situations in the future when various documents need to be signed, or there is, you know, a time when a decision medically, for whatever reason, might need to be made that your daughter can't contribute to that decision at the time because of what the decision may be. That there'll be discussion around who's the responsible person. There'll be, you know, is there a need to have a guardian at that point in time in relation to it? You know, the Guardianship Act at the moment is going through a process of re-evaluation and looking at having a more structured, supported decision-making process going forward. And one of the submissions that we made at Synapse to the Law Reform Commission in relation to it is that realistically, the most applications that I'm involved with in the Guardianship Tribunal occur for two reasons. One is, three reasons. One is that someone has no one else in their life, no informal supports in their life at all, and needs to have a public decision maker available for them in relation to that. The second reason is that the informal supports in that person's life disagree about what decisions need to be made going forward, and there needs to be a role then for a tribunal to play in looking at that. But far more often than not, a person has really good support around them. The decisions that are made are good decisions that are made for the person, and with that person contributing to those decisions. But it's some form of bureaucracy that requires a formal order in place in relation to it. Be it government, be it financial institution, be it, you know, the land titles office, be it signing a lease, you know, and a real estate agent gets shirty about things and things like that. You know? They're the three areas that tend to sort of have you end up in the tribunal for a formal order in relation to it.
So we might just take two more questions. James, you had a look like you wanted to ask something.
Wanted to say thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you, James. Candice, did you?
No, I didn't. I just wanted one more question to Max. the next 5 years in terms of your living arrangement. It's clear to me that in all sense, like the ideal thing for Rowan would be to remain with you and his parents. Would that be a fair comment? That there's no particular, at least, journey where he would then become totally independent of you?
So the query was around the ideal living arrangement in 5 years and what would that look like?
Yes, yes. Yeah, we've our current position in the view, our view now, and of course that could change tomorrow, but our current position is one of saying, yes, Rowan will be with us. We're healthy enough, strong enough, and we get the supports that we need in to assist him. We've got an NDIS package that will allow us to do that, and therefore we will stay that way. The more longer term issues are, put it rather bluntly, I would hate to reach the day that suddenly we're both not there and it happens like that. Rowan has, what has he got? He's got his sister to come and help him sometimes, but you know, what's going to happen? That's the longer term. But still, our view is that we can continue to get the support from outside. It's unlikely that both of us will turn up our toes at the one time. And therefore one of us there directing traffic. We might need a lot of care to do it, but still that will continue until we can no longer. But we believe that the most realistic way of doing it is still within the one household. However, there may be a point in time where we need to transfer Rowan into a more independent, more separated position so that for his welfare, that we're suddenly not just torn away. So there's still a lot of dilemma that goes on in our minds. When do you do that? You would hope never, but that's not being realistic. So you've just got to keep working through this path over and over again and read the signs as you're going. But it's, sorry, we can't make that decision. And as I say, even now, we'd like to think, well, what will they need in those circumstances? We don't know. No one, I don't think there's many people in this world that can forecast what they'll need or what their siblings will need. So you've just got to go with what you've got today, and that's the most concrete thing you've got, and then work with that.
And is Rowan happy, presumably?
Yes.
With you guys?
Yes, he is. And, there's little things that happen. We just recently, my younger brother, one brother down, he has a couple of racehorses, and he brought one to Wyong. And it happened to be on Wyong Cup Day. Now, we brought Ro come along. He had an appointment in the morning, so we got there a couple of races from the end, and we took him into the enclosure where the jockeys and trainers and everyone else took him to the gate, and the guy there said, "Oh, geez, bring him in here." And so they were very accommodating, very helpful. But then before the Wyong Cup, the national anthem was sung. Now, just in front of us was this young lady singing the national anthem. So Ro joined in and sang the national anthem. He then, as the last race that the horse was in, ran second, and he could see it on the screen. And, he was over the Absolutely over the moon. And, you know, we then went and had dinner with brother, and he comes from up near Kempsey, that sort of thing. So, and look, he really joined in. He really is happy. There'll be questions asked, like, because he would normally, after he had a busy morning, he'd normally after lunch he'd have a rest. And one of us will say to him, well, do you want to go and have a rest, or Dad's going to watch so-and-so on telly or whatever? And he makes the decision, no, I'll stay with Dad. It's okay. Yeah, I'll go away, give the rest away. So they are just little snapshots of the fact that he's quite happy as we go along. And look, he has some good friends, a couple of guys that are in bands. He was pretty much in the music game himself a lot of the time, come from New Zealand, and each time they get here, they give us a buzz, and he'll talk for days about Andrew and Lockie and the guys that were in this band that he was friends with, and so on. But you know, there's that sort of support as well, and we encourage all that sort of thing, all these old mates and that to come along. So, you know, it's a job, and we work through it. But he still, at this stage, I'd say, seems to enjoy it. And he tells his mother he loves her occasionally as well.
Well, thank you, Max. I think some of the key words in those last few minutes that you spoke was the dilemma. That really spoke to me, that I'm sure each person feels that constant questioning and dilemma of what if, when, how. But then also you said the word snapshot, and I really felt that, you know, I've known you and Sue for a while and never actually met Rowan, but I feel like after tonight, I really do know him. I think we've all had a really good picture of this family life, and hopefully it's prompted some thoughts and some discussions for each of you in preparing for the future of yourself as well as for your loved ones. So we might finish up there. Thank you to people watching from home, and please feel free to get in touch with any questions or feedback or concerns. And thank you to everyone for joining us here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.